Hi, I am Katina Horton, the Love and Freedom Toxic Relationship Recovery Coach. And today's Bible teaching is entitled Six Reasons Why You're Giving Your Power Away, Part 2. The fourth reason why you're giving your power away is because of learned helplessness, okay? And what happens, an example of learned helplessness is like watching people set up a barricade for mice, right? And the mice are trying and trying and trying and trying to get through the barricade. After a while, they give up trying, right? Because they get through that barricade, but on the other side of that barricade is another barricade that has them blocked, right? And so they give up trying, right? And then let's just say by chance, another person comes along and removes what's on the other side of the barricade. But because all of the mice have been conditioned to think that there's nothing on the other side of that barricade except for an empty room and another trap that will kill them, they give up on trying, right? And so this is a perfect example of what learned helplessness, right? It's a perfect example of learned helplessness to a T. A lot of us have grown up in homes where parents were so despondent and discouraged and in despair, right? Due to living in poverty, that they decided there was no point in trying to get themselves out of the projects, right? To get a working class job, right? To try to go to school and to be able to increase their skills, right? It was learned helplessness. And a lot of the learned helplessness came from what? Their parents, came from who rather? Their parents, right? Due to them living in poverty, right? And so what happens is that after a while of telling yourself over and over again, why try? Why even try? Tomorrow is just going to be just like today, right? And yes, a lot of them have had terrible situations that they've had to endure, that they've had to overcome, right? Poverty is trauma within itself, right? And so they experience this lack for so long that even once they even have the opportunity to get out of the situation that they're in, a lot of times they don't. Now, I want to read a situation, a case from scripture, and that's from Acts 3. It says, now Peter and John were going up to the temple for the time of prayer at 3 in the afternoon. A man who was lame from birth was being carried there. He was placed each day at the temple gate called Beautiful, so that he could beg from those entering the temple. When he saw Peter and John about to enter the temple, he asked for money. Peter, along with John, looked straight at him and said, look at us. So they wanted to make sure what? That they had his attention, right? And sometimes we tell little kids that. I know I told my little niece who is almost 2 years old, I said, look at Auntie Tina. And she didn't want to look at me because what? I already told her something she didn't want to hear. So it's like, okay, you done told me that I can't let your hand go. I'm not going to even look at you, right? So they said, look at us. So they want to make sure they had his attention. And it says, so he turned to them, expecting to get something from them. But Peter said, I don't have silver or gold, but what I do have, I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, get up and walk. Then taking him by the right hand, he raised him up. And at once his feet and ankles became strong. So he jumped up and started to walk, and he entered the temple with them, walking, leaping, and praising God. So he thought that he needed the money to make him feel better, right? He needed a holistic thing going on, right? And then it says what? All the people saw him walking and praising God. They probably said, wait a minute, this is that man that was lame, right? And we don't see him there asking for money. We actually see him walking and praising God and heal and whole, right? And it says, and they recognized that he was the one who used to sit and beg at the beautiful gate of the temple. So they were filled with awe and astonishment at what had happened to him, right? And so what happens when it comes to learned helplessness, right? What happens is that you get to the point, your parents got to the point, your grandparents got to the point, your great-grandparents, a lot of times, they got to the point where it was like, well, why even try, right? Because they After a while, they feel like we're not even worthy. even if something good comes along, right? And a lot of times the old folks will say, oh, my hands are itching. That must mean I'm going to get something today, right? So they get to the point where they start feeling, well, why even try? Because nothing good is going to happen, right? And so what happens is that they experience the lack for so long. When they get this opportunity to get out, they won't even get out. And then the spirit of unworthiness takes over their whole entire being, right? And it's been in their system so long that they end up developing these toxic belief systems that turn into what? Limited worldviews / strongholds, right? And we know that once strongholds take root, we cannot, I don't care who it is, there's no person, place, thing, and or idea that can penetrate through that stronghold to change our minds, right? That's when it becomes a learned helplessness situation. And then once we're in that state of learned helplessness, we start pulling the trump cards out of the drawers, right? And 2 weeks ago, I talked about the trump cards. We start talking about how, and what happens though is that trump cards encourage victim mentality. So we start, and it also what? It does also reveals poor character. And then they also enable the victim to escape responsibilities because of their vulnerabilities and status quo that's connected to those vulnerabilities, right? And so you got to remember that the trump cards are real situations, real life, hard, traumatic situations, right? A lot of times, a set of unfortunate circumstances that has happened to that individual. But there are also secondary problems that cover up the primary or real source of the issue. And some of the things you hear people say, well, you know, all the folks out here, they just taking all the jobs up. And a lot of times it's jobs that a lot of people don't even want to stand in line to apply for. But this will be their trump card when somebody say, well, why aren't you working? Well, you know, everybody else taking up all the jobs that's out here, instead of saying what? I've gotten into a state of mind. I'm not really sure how I got here, but I need help getting out. Do you mind helping me, giving me some tips? You know, maybe I need to go see therapy, or maybe that's something you can suggest. But instead, what? The person pulls the trump card out of the drawer so they can remain a victim, right? And so what happens is that a lot of times the same people that will pull the trump cards out of the drawers and say, I don't even believe in that. I don't believe in using programs. They're the same people that's using the program. So then you say, well, aren't you using the programs to benefit you? Isn't your daughter and or son or grandchild using the program? Yeah, but that's different. And we talked about that before too, right? When you got double-mindedness, you also have double standards, right? I don't believe in something, but I'm taking advantage of it. There's something wrong there, right? And it's very true. Okay, we cannot X out the fact there's racial brokenness that exists in the world, right? However, at the same time, when we are so close to certain individuals and we've gotten a chance to see them up close and personal, we realize that their trump cards is doing what? Nothing but holding them back from what the reality of the situation is, right? It's preventing them from walking in integrity, right? Because when you use a trump card, that means you'll compartmentalize it. I'm not going to look at this area, but I'll look at the other 4 areas of my life. But those 5 put in the drawer, right? And so what happens is that instead of them thinking about the fact of what they can do to get out of the situation, right? Cook themselves a meal, comb their hairs, right? Have a relationship with their children, right? Sit down at the dinner table with their children. It's always somebody else's fault. And so what happens when it comes to learned helplessness is that we have situations with people who come out of poverty, but because they have not done the work of getting out of the poverty mindset, whenever it comes to taking care of things they need, they won't follow through on them. They'll buy the things they want. And then once the budget is low and they're not able to get the things they need, then they'll often call up different people to take care of those things. Well, you know that I don't have any money. You know that I'm poor. And the situation is not that they're poor, right? The situation is what? It's still connected to that poverty mindset and the learned helplessness, right? And then along with the learned helplessness and the poverty mindset, it's all attached to the trauma that they've never resolved, right? They've never sat and talked to a therapist or a coach and worked out, right? They're still walking around believing those false concepts about love and their experiences, the lies that were created about what? Love and money and the love of it. Because some people believe that money is the root of all evil. It's the love of money, right? And so they never worked out those limiting beliefs that they created. They never worked out the learned stress responses that the trauma caused, right? About that false concept about love and money and this relationship to each other, right? And so that distorts their view of God. It distorts their view of themselves. It distorts their view of other people, right? Learned helplessness creates blindness. Until we do that, until we tackle the poverty mindset, right? We will always want to go and walk into this state of learned helplessness and pull out the trump cards, pull the trump cards out the door as if you're playing spades, right? We'll always want to walk around pointing fingers and saying that our life looks this way because of this and that and the other. It's always somebody else's fault. And as I said before, because we don't want to have a Pollyanna attitude about how it is in society, right? That's also not walking in integrity. That's also being fragmented, to walk around and pretend like in society that there are systems that set up, specifically set up in place for individuals when it comes to housing and a lot of other things, okay? Situation I'm talking about is like when the person has been able to overcome all of that and they still have not been able to get a control of the money, and they're still walking around saying that they are poor and this and that and the other. And it's because of what? Them not having dealt with the trauma. And so the clutter addiction, the hoarding addiction, the shopping addiction, the one-upping and trying to prove that they can live the life that they were never able to live, and that other people, whether it's other ethnicities or races or whatever groups of people from elite clubs are able to do to try to prove to them, now I have the funds to be able to do it. But because they didn't work that trauma out, the trauma gets worked out in what? Addictions that help them to numb out, right? And so we don't want to be Pollyannas when it comes to not realizing what's set up out here. And then be like, when somebody tell you something and you don't want to believe them, and like, oh no, that's not going on. That was way years ago. That was in the 60s. That was during the slavery system. It's still baked into the systems, like having a baked lasagna is well alive and kicking and baked into the systems we have going on right now, right? And so what happened is when you don't take care of that trauma, you'll see everybody else buying homes, buying cars, investing in property, stocks, bonds, CDs, etc., right? And those are the things you've been wanting to do for years, but because you haven't taken care of the trauma, the addictions, the hoarding addictions, the clutter addictions, the shopping addictions, and any other comfort addictions are taking the place to help you to numb out from the pain, from the shame and the insecurities you had to deal with as a child growing up in a state of lack, right? And so there are some situations where the person is still poor. They're still living in a state of poverty. And they might say, well, I can't even, like the child might ask for something. I can't even barely afford to pay the light bill. And you think that I'm going to buy you some shoes. You think that I'm going to buy you a new pair of eyeglasses. You think I'm going to be able to go and buy you some new sweaters. But what happens is that the child sees the parent doing what? Going and buying all of those different things for themselves, even when they can't afford it, even when they're in a state of poverty. Once again, this is connected to what? The poverty mindset that gets created, right? That trauma creates, because trauma creates scarcity, and scarcity is based upon lack, right? And in the one-upping spirit is what ends up being infused inside of our minds, bodies, souls, and spirits. Because the one-upping spirit is based upon what? The seed of envy and a spirit of lack, right? And so even though they can't afford to buy those things because they can barely afford the things they need, barely afford the rent, they might be what? They'll go and buy that, what, $3,000, whatever, $3,000 worth of something, or spend $3,000 on one thing they cannot afford. Whereas other bills and other necessities that the children need to be taken care of. So they can't even afford to do any of it. But because of need to what? Live in a false reality, right? In order to numb out and be in magical thinking land, I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway, right? And so what happens is this vicious cycle was taught to the children, because what they saw growing up, then it's like, okay, I'm going to grow up and do the same thing with my children. I can't afford these things, but I'm going to go ahead and get them. And or I got out of that place, but I'm going to still keep saying that I am poor, right? As I'm getting everything I want, everything that was held back from me as a child, but not the things I need. And I can call other people and beg for them to take care of those things, right? There is a limit on how much money we have to spend. God doesn't have a limit. There's no limit with God, who is our Father, right? He can make all things possible. There is a limit on what we can spend, on what we have to spend, right? In our physical bank accounts, okay? Like I said, the trauma is creating a scarcity mindset. The scarcity mindset is based upon lack. And that spirit of one-upping is also based upon lack, right? And that means that we're going to operate off of lack continuously until we do what? Deal with the trauma from our childhood so we can do what? Push and move forward. You are enough. God's provision is enough, right? Reclaim your power, soul, and identity today. And then I want to challenge you to reclaim the power, soul, right, and identity of your calling. Grab your keys to the kingdom and get your inheritance. Again, I'm Katina Horton, the Love and Freedom Toxic Relationship Recovery Coach. Until next time, be blessed.